Stuart,
Hi.
a little over 2 weeks since our last interview. What's been happening in those 2 weeks?
Well, I've been, working on the London legal campaigns as I do a lot of the time, and I've been otherwise just doing what I do to enjoy myself. I was able to go out running this morning, for example. I took part in a local 15k race and I set a personal best, notwithstanding the wind conditions. 1 hour, 6 minutes. I did almost actually consider trying to run it with this on to get a bit of practice in, for the forthcoming events, but I decided it might stop me getting a personal best if I used the ball and chain at the moment.
Good job you didn't use the ball and chain, and congratulations on your PB. But of course that's not the reason we're here, is it? It's this interview, for instance, is a continuation of our previous interview, where you were asking for, in your words, a lawful court. There's been some developments in this area, hasn't there?
Well, what purports to be a court locally is proceeding as it chooses to, which is with conflicted judges ignoring their previous judgment in which they said no further action was going to be taken, and they're still trying to take further action against me. And they're doing this notwithstanding the fact that I've notified the appeal court secretariat that I'm making an appeal, that I'm working on it, and it's going to be filed soon. But nevertheless, even though these matters are outstanding matters of appeal, the court of first instance is still trying to oppress me for basically trying to expose crimes and corruption by the local authorities.
Because for anybody new to this, the charge once more is contempt of court, although the thing that you're in supposed contempt of, alleged contempt of, the judgment was ruled that there should be no further action taken anyway. Just could you explain that sort of bit to the readers briefly?
Well, to be honest, I'm not totally sure I can. It's so irrational and crazy. I think the Jersey court system, and this is the view actually of people who give me a little bit of legal advice from London, they look at these events in Jersey and they just can't understand it. It's just madness. The court, I don't think, knows itself what it's doing. It can't say on the one hand no further action is going to be taken and then a couple of weeks later deciding it is going to take further action. It's obviously ridiculous, and it's also oppressive to be taking these kind of actions when the matters at issue are still matters of appeal. But just to refresh your viewers' memory, basically this arises out of what is clearly the corrupt and abusive and suppressive distorted application of the data protection law in Jersey to try and shut down independent journalism. We independent journalists in recent years, using the internet, have started to expose lots of crimes and wrongdoing by Jersey's authorities, the kind of things they were always able to usually cover up with the collusion of the local mainstream media. They can't do that anymore, and this is a huge crisis for them. All of these crimes we're exposing with evidence. They don't like that, so they've got to stop it. And that's why they're repressing me to try and make an example of me. And once they've silenced me, they will be after every other independent journalist in Jersey. So obviously I have to resist this. You're quite right. Technically the charge, as it were, that they're trying to lay against me would be contempt of court. To which I say, without re-emphasising it again and again, the same point I made in the previous interview, which is that you have to start from first base and ask, is this court a lawful court? Does it meet the tests of objectivity and impartiality? Is it compliant with Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights? The answer to those questions is no. So it isn't a lawful court, and it simply has no validity.
So you're due to be in court. There's a big question got to mark at the minute, because I believe that the local state media has been sniffing around trying to find out whether you're going to be turning up for court or not. Can we put people's minds at rest now? Are you going to court tomorrow?
No, I won't be going to this event at which this collection of conflicted individuals who are being chosen and appointed by directly concerned parties, their friends, that's pretending to be a court. I'm not going to turn up to this event because it has no validity. You're quite correct. One of the local mainstream media has been in touch with me, very unusually because it's a rare occurrence, but I did on Friday get an email from Channel Television, which is the local franchise of ITN News. Now, as it happens, this is too short notice. They've had months and months to contact me and do in-depth, detailed interviews.
A couple of years, some of them.
Indeed, 2 or 3 years. They've had plenty of opportunity, and I just don't have time to do an interview with them on Monday. However, given that Channel Television have expressed this interest, and they are part of this broad news franchise of ITN, I'm going to email them some very important evidence, very crucial evidence that deals with a matter, frankly, of national, indeed perhaps even international significance. So they will certainly have some material of relevance to these matters that they could indeed do a very, very serious story about, and who they could ask some very serious questions of those in authority about. So we'll see whether Channel Television are interested.
So you're not going to be giving them an interview tomorrow on this particular unlawful, to use your words, court case. Well, don't you think by not engaging with the local state media, this will inhibit your opportunity to influence local opinion? Because, you know, they're a powerful organisation, the local media. Your story needs to get out there. Aren't you being your own worst enemy here? Shouldn't you be giving them an interview so you are able to influence opinion?
You forget, I spent a couple of decades trying to work with the local media, and it's a futile exercise. All of the local mainstream media is basically owned, quote unquote, by the local oligarchy, and they're in the pockets of the local authorities. And it isn't even, frankly, disguised, and it isn't even cleverly done as to how they manipulate stories. So it's a forlorn hope, expecting the local mainstream media to actually get the truth out there and to give the public genuine, fact-based, evidence-based information. Indeed, it's worse than that. The local mainstream media actually engage in the most well-known and crude spin doctor PR devices. And when you read about these kind of techniques, you know, it's not even very sophisticated. I mean, for example, I have a book here. I mean, this is an essential read. This is called PR, A Social History of Spin.
Stuart Ewan.
By Stuart Ewan. And it's an absolutely brilliant book that all thinking people really ought to read. And this documents, from the very early 20th century, all of the techniques of opinion management and manipulating public opinion that were developed in the West, and indeed those techniques were later taken up and adopted by various totalitarian regimes. I mean, for example, one of the techniques, one of the devices used by propaganda media is depicting those who oppose the government, those who oppose a corrupt regime, trying to depict them as somehow bad or dangerous, or even if not directly dangerous, try and depict those who are friends or allies of them as dangerous. And this is one of the crudest, most obvious techniques, you know, that we see in the history books. And so the local media certainly do that. They try to marginalise people, they try to isolate people, and those of us who are good, honest, concerned citizens who are campaigning against basically the corruption of the Jersey system, we get depicted as villains, or those who are supporting us get depicted as villains, usually entirely falsely, with no validity at all. And it's all, frankly, so transparent, it can be seen quite easily what it is they're doing.
So it's just a waste of time to give any interviews to the state media, because...
Pretty much, yes. I mean, and let's face it, the issues we're fighting for here really are the proper rule of law, as opposed to just say massed public opinion. And there's an important difference between the two. We shouldn't live in a society that has tyranny by the majority. You know, we have in the Western world, in theory, objective courts of law and the proper rule of law to protect individuals, powerless individuals, from, say, mob rule, or powerful individuals or powerful companies or governments. Now, that is something that we ought to have in Jersey, but we don't have. So securing that kind of protection of individuals, securing the proper rule of law, is what we're fighting for, and that ultimately is only going to be secured via the courts in the United Kingdom.
Well, so what is the end game here? You know, you're not going to be turning up to their courts. They're just going to come and arrest you, aren't they? They'll just come and arrest you. What are you going to do then once you're arrested?
Yes, sooner or later they're going to come and arrest me. I mean, in some ways it's surprising they haven't done so yet, and that they'll put me in prison for a few days, and then they'll haul me before their courts. And what they will want me to what they will want to force me to do is purge contempt of the court. Now, I'm not going to be doing that because the court is an unlawful structure. So when I'm hauled before this group of friends who purport to be a court, I will make the relevant legal arguments to them. I will point out that this is not a lawful court. It comprises directly conflicted individuals or people chosen by directly conflicted individuals. I will point at the relevant established case law, English case law, predating even the European Convention on Human Rights. I will point at the European Convention case law, and I will explain on the evidence and on the case law how this apparatus is not a lawful court.
But most will argue that's not going to make a blind bit of bloody difference.
Well, you're quite right. You're absolutely right. It won't make a scrap of difference. We know from past experience that being right and having the evidence and the law on your side counts for nothing in Jersey's courts. Jersey's courts are utterly, structurally politicised, intrinsically corrupt entities, and I have seen that many, many times against me in the past, and so have lots of other people. Actually, are increasingly a growing number of people are seeing that Jersey's courts are just a Potemkin village. You know, they're just fake. So of course these arguments won't make any difference, you know, to these idiots who are pretending to be a court. They'll just send me back to prison. But eventually this is going to have to get taken to court in London against the United Kingdom Justice Secretary and the Crown and the Privy Council for permitting this obviously, and on the evidence, unlawful structure to persecute people and to stop free speech. Now, it simply isn't lawful. And you ask what the end game is. The end game, there is only one end game, and that is ultimately the United Kingdom government will have to confront the fact that it is responsible, and its entire international reputation is based upon having the proper rule of law. And sooner or later, Jersey's feudal oligarchy is going to collide with that fact.
And so, to finish on, you're obviously prepared for prison, to go to prison and fight your legal battle from a prison cell if needs be.
Indeed. Yep.
Because it's just something you pick up on there. Basically, what you're saying is London's reputation rests on the validity of reputation of Jersey's justice system.
Indeed. It is not possible for the United Kingdom to adopt the stance it does in the international community as one of the most fundamentally free, democratic and lawful states in the Western world, whilst tolerating the obviously corrupt, obviously structurally unlawful, obviously oppressive and anti-democratic system that exists in Jersey. And the powers that be in London clearly don't want to have to be confronted with that issue, and they really, really, really just wish it would go away, but it isn't going to. There's inevitably the day is going to come where they've got no choice, and they're going to have to grasp the nettle and clean up the Jersey system.
I suppose just because I know we're running short on time here, we're running out of video, but I suppose wouldn't it be fair to argue if the Jersey establishment imprison you again, isn't it going to look pretty embarrassing to those in London? Isn't it going to be it could be quite a dangerous, politically sensitive move to make, couldn't it, by imprisoning you again?
Oh, it's going to be disastrous for the reputation of the authorities in London, because we have to remember that things change and evolve. There's increasing national and international scrutiny on Jersey's offshore finance sector activity. The powers, as it were, in the City of London Corporation, who protect Jersey's offshore finance industry. All the while, the UK is holding itself up to be an absolute paragon of democratic, lawful, free speech. Now, It just isn't sustainable for this obviously lawless regime in Jersey, which is at serious risk of contaminating the very good name of the British Crown itself. It just isn't possible for this regime to carry on imprisoning dissidents whose only offence is to expose the corrupt cover-ups by those in power and in authority in Jersey. At the moment, Jersey is basically a propaganda enclave that imprisons dissidents. But, you know, we know all about it. We know the facts. We're an educated public these days, and we know what Jersey's justice system really means. But this is the 21st century. This is the age of the internet. And not only are we fighting it, we're going to win.